We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am super excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Dr. Femi Olu Lafe. She is the Senior Vice President of Culture Inclusion for IPG's Acxiom, Kinesso, and Matterkind. Femi, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for our listeners, including your pronouns and when you were younger, do you remember how you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Would love to. It's a pleasure to be here. So thank you for inviting me. I am Femi. Like you said, my pronouns are she, her, hers. I lead up global culture inclusion for IPG's Acxiom, Kinesso, Matterkind. So it's basically my job to ensure everyone in our organization feels seen, heard, and valued and has equal opportunity to thrive. I'm really passionate about people from a diverse range of backgrounds to really love working at the organization and really having those equal opportunities to grow and flourish in our organization. So what I wanted to be when I grew up, well, when I
Yeah.
was younger, I wanted to actually be a backup dancer for MC Hammer. So that was my initial
Yes.
goal. And, wisdom, goals change and sometimes they really should. So I guess more related to this question, another thing I wanted to do when I was young is I wanted to be able to read minds. That was a big thing of mine. So when I went to undergrad and I learned about psychology, I said, interesting. This gives me the tools to maybe better know what's going on inside people's head. So I think that is kind of aligned a little bit what I do now, where I kind of help people understand themselves a little bit better, and help companies see how they can work to build better workplaces for people.
Absolutely. I think it's so important, especially making sure that people feel seen, heard, and valued. For working, we work a large majority of our lives, and I have a lot of questions around that. But I always like to ask too, what would you say also defines you as a person, Femi?
Uh, I think people feeling seen and valued is something that is very aligned to my life purpose. I think my passion for psychology, aside from being very nosy, is that I just, again, wanted to understand people, help them understand themselves better, help them feel truly seen and celebrated. And for me, a pivotal moment came. So I'm Nigerian, born in Nigeria. We immigrated here when I was a child, and I grew up in an environment that was not very diverse. Not only, I mean, not a lot of immigrants, not a lot of Black people. So a Nigerian foreigner, they really did not know what to make of me. So in that environment, the messaging I received around me was that difference was not a great thing. It was a weird thing. And eventually I became part of my high school, actually was an international school. So there I was exposed to people from all over the world. And they had one day a year called International Day, where everyone wore their national garb, brought the food that they ate, and they celebrated difference. So the message I got in that environment was difference was this fun thing, was this cool thing. And I felt so seen and celebrated for who I was and valued that it really changed my life. I was always an overachiever and got straight A's, but being in that environment, I was, I was playing lacrosse. I was part of the choir. I ran for student government, which was not, didn't seem like me. But I really, again, it helped me really, really flourish. So I think that's a moment where that life mission in me started to grow, where it's, where can I go? How can I do this? How can I build more environments where people feel that same transformation that I experienced as well? And that's probably the key, what really defines me.
I really appreciate you kind of sharing your personal journey to this work. I think especially our formative years and our background and our kind of foundation really impacts how we show up today in the world, also at work too. And when we're talking about having that sense of belonging, feel like you are in community and that you are celebrated, we definitely want to touch on kind of that company culture that you're creating at the organization too. What would you say are qualitative and quantitative ways we can actually measure that company culture to see if we have a pulse on what's going on, and kind of measuring to make sure that folks feel like they are part of the company, especially when new people are joining every day and the companies continue to grow?
Yeah. Great question. I think listening is instrumental for companies to really assess their culture and empower employees in the way that they need to. So we have a multifaceted employee listening program that consists of both quantitative and qualitative ways to assess our culture. So the quantitative ways are kind of checkpoints throughout the years, different kinds of employee surveys. We have the pulse surveys, we have an engagement survey, we have an inclusion survey, all scattered throughout the years to really, again, take a pulse on what's happening across our organization. We also have qualitative measures that includes focus groups. We have a fantastic anonymous employee feedback platform that we're using, not a plug for AllVoices at all. But that's also important for us to get feedback and listening. And so those key points really help us understand what's going on with our culture.
I appreciate how you outlined it's a multi-pronged approach because at the end of the day, people want to be heard in different ways. Not everybody's going to want to raise their hand in a virtual all hands, stand up and share feedback in front of everybody. It takes time to build trust with your manager. So making sure you are kind of aware of all those different touch points, I think is important. What would you say, based on your kind of experience, is the difference between a quote unquote good company culture and a great place to work?
Yeah. And I think even based off of what you shared there, I think a good place would be, all right, we have this survey here. That's enough to know about our culture. I think that would be a good company culture. But I think great is when you go to that next level. Good to me kind of means ticking off the kind of must-haves to get there. And great is where you're looking at what's that next level to make sure, what's that thoughtful approach that we're taking to make sure that we really understand what's going on with our people and how we can best support them. What are we doing to make work feel more purposeful, to make people feel that they're not just coming in and doing a job, but they're fully supported to do it. They're energized at their job. They feel appreciated. They feel like their input is valuable and considered. And I think that's what takes you to that great place to work, that environment you create for people.
Yeah, absolutely. What are we doing? What actions are we taking? How are we acknowledging kind of the feedback that we receive too? Because it's a two-way kind of conversation. In terms of, a lot of different folks at the company, if you're a formal or informal leader, it's not just Femi's responsibility to create that environment of inclusivity, even though it's something that you're passionate about as well. That would be a lot and very unreasonable. So I definitely want to ask, how should organizations hold every leader at every kind of level to have that equity driven mindset to really build out processes that are inclusive and have that those questions in mind?
Yeah. And I think it's a combination of education and clearing and setting clear expectations as well. I think set those clear expectation around diversity, equity, inclusion, and explain the why behind that. I think sometimes leaders don't understand, no, this is why this is an expectation for you, because this is aligned with our valued, is aligned with where we want our business to go. And we've looked at our ecosystem and seen that these are key opportunities for us, and this is who we are. And you showing up as a leader in this way is aligned with who we say we are. So setting those clear expectations, and also setting that clear outcomes around, if you hold those up or if you fail to hold those up, what will happen there. And then I think the third step is actually following up following through with we set the expectations, we set the what will happen if you hold it up, if you don't, and now we're going to hold you accountable to that. And I think setting those, that educational piece, setting the expectations is really helpful for people. And I would also say, Christina, helping leaders understand what's happening in their backyard. I think giving them that kind of view of what's happening at the organizational level, and then saying, and here's what's happening with your business unit, here are the opportunities for you, and kind of co-creating a solution together. I think sometimes leaders can be left with these goals and kind of just left off to kind of figure it out. So my role and our team is to kind of have those conversations with leaders about, here are your opportunities. Let's see, what do we want to try? What do we want to do differently to make progress when it comes to this? And I think that helps them, again, that educational level and that conversation helps those leaders start to develop that mindset for themselves to look at these problems with that lens as well.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have those expectations set too, and make sure that people understand that it's a need to have, not a nice to have. It's part of the business. It's part of a mindset that we should be thinking about as leaders and folks who are empowering people to do really great work, setting up that framework in terms of what, knowing what's happening in your own backyard, really, having these channels available, really building a kind of environment of trust. I know that we recognize that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a journey and not a destination. So I want to ask your philosophy around, in terms of accountability, what is, the metrics we can look at, or how would you recommend measuring progress towards these goals in terms of accountability? Is it, related, should it be related to performance reviews? I've seen some companies do that. Is it related to like asking questions to the kind of team on a regular basis about their manager? What are your thoughts there?
I think it's both. Like you said, we always say DEI is a journey, and also we need to have clear signposts for this journey, right? I know things evolve and things happen in the organization, but we need to give people a clear sense of, yeah, this is what we're after, the broad thing we're after. Here's our North Star. And here are the key signposts that are going to help us get to where we're at, and what we're going to be checking in on. So you can have that 5-year goal, and then what's the 1 year, 2 year, 3 year that's going to help you get there? And how do you know? Before my job now, I did a lot of leadership assessment and leadership
Yeah.
development, executive coaching. So a big part of that is helping leaders know, how am I doing? And there are different tools to let you know how you're doing, from 360 feedback to psychometrics. And those together let you know how you're doing. And those tools are also helpful for you to measure progress. So I think the same thing with our leaders, where you have these goals, and then you have things like the employee listening that help you understand what's the culture they're setting with their teams. You have clear, goals and metrics you're looking at when it comes to diversity, when it comes to equity as well. And also when it comes to inclusion and the environments they're building. So having that North Star, having the key points of what we're going after, checking in, and making sure people know, how am I doing? Am I heading in the right direction? Am I making progress or not?
Mhm. Absolutely. I think those check-in points and those points of reflection are important as well. It's also important for leaders to check in, make sure they're investing in these outcomes and goals, and keeping kind of everyone part of the big picture together. I know we talked kind of a lot around the importance of having employee feedback in all senses. Can you share an example of how kind of employee feedback has informed a kind of change in policy, strategy, initiative, anything workplace related? At the organization.
Yes, yeah, it's so important to listen to employees. A big thing we're focusing on right now is making sure that people feel as refreshed and re-energized as possible. We're seeing in the industry globally, really, burnout rates are really proliferating across all industries and all companies. And so we want to make sure we see what's going on with our people, and we see how we can most empower them. And what we're finding is, as a leader, again, you can have great ideas, and those ideas are valuable. However, it's important to listen to people and to the employees, because you have one perspective and they have another, and you might not, there might be mismatches. So to your question, what we heard through surveys was that people said that they really valued, we have unlimited paid time off, which is really amazing. And people
Woo!
said, we really value this. And also we have a series of well-being resources we have for people. And people also said, we love these, they're really helpful. And also what would be really helpful in terms of enjoying this time off is if we could all have maybe the dedicated time off, that we all took that same time, the same moment, because what happens is you might take this time off, but it's really hard to truly disconnect because things are still happening with your team. So you enjoy it, but for some people, their mind is still on that.
Mhm.
And so our leaders heard that and they saw that and they said, why don't we do things a little bit differently? And they decided to give folks a kind week at the end of summer. So that is where our offices were completely shut down. So everyone across the organization could take that week off to just focus. And again, you don't have to worry about, okay, what's going on with my team? You really can take that moment to truly disconnect and recover. So
Mhm.
that was helpful for us, because it was good to hear what people value. And it was good to hear what might have been an opportunity for us and to try that and listen to people.
That was a really great example of giving people the gift of time and proactively preventing burnout. And when we talk about burnout, that is burnout from working a lot and job related, but also all of the things that are happening in people's lives in terms of caretaking, working parents, uh, loneliness if you are living at home and you need to quarantine as well. So all of the different factors. Keeping along the lines of feedback, I wanted to ask your opinion around some leaders are a little bit hesitant to collect anonymous feedback and think, your name should be attached to feedback at all times, or, we built a really trusting environment, so we don't need to have this as an option. But I want to ask why this is important for psychological safety, or why it was kind of a decision that was made for the team too.
Yeah, I think, and I hear that, especially since, like I said, I was a coach, and you do 360 feedback. So sometimes it's anonymous and sometimes it's not. And I think, sometimes people just don't feel comfortable and or safe speaking up. And you will miss out on really valuable data and feedback if you don't have an avenue for people to contribute anonymously. We want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to speak and be heard. And so anonymous feedback provides a way for people to speak up safely and share honest feedback and concerns. And I think there are power dynamics in companies. So you might see something, you might see an issue, and just not be comfortable sharing that with your leader. And again, we can say as much as we can, here's one avenue, but this is really, I think, a necessary and powerful avenue for people to speak up and to feel like they have that psychological safety to be heard in an anonymous environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people can be working in the best conditions possible, but bring with them a lot of experiences that have told them don't give your feedback, or fear of different things. So I definitely kind of resonate with that too. You mentioned kind of courageous leadership before, and I wanted to kind of ask you to define, what does that really mean, courageous leadership?
Oh, good question. Courageous leadership to me, I think, means leading from compassion. And I think leading from compassion usually entails that you know what someone's going through. So listening has been a key theme of our conversation today. So leading from compassion, where you meet people where they are, and compassion is also very action oriented. So you meet people where they are and then you take actions in terms of creating an environment and supporting others. Leading with vulnerability, I think, is a key part of courageous leadership as well. So how are you being open to other people? How are you not just having to have everything together all the time? I think as a leader, support is helpful. Supporting your team is helpful, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're the stoic leader all the time. Uh, I also think a key part of courageous leadership is humility. So having that sense of other people, not having that arrogance, but being humble, and being humble doesn't mean that you're downplaying your strengths. It's having an accurate perception of your strengths, but also being mindful of the importance of the perspective of others and the strengths of others to really build something powerful. So I think probably those three, the compassion, the vulnerability, and humility, to me, that's courageous leadership.
I love that. And especially over the past few years, I think we've seen more people lean into the vulnerability, the empathy, kind of the sharing, the context and the why for their decision making, but also what's happening if they are having a good day, a bad day, what's happening in the world as well. In terms of the characteristics of compassion and kind of that empathy and having a growth mindset, is there kind of an ideal way to teach kind of new managers or new people leading teams these skills, in your opinion?
Yeah, and I think sometimes organizations just want this to be organic. And I think a lot of this stuff feels unnatural before it feels natural when it comes to leading people. And I think people are saying, I'm a human, you're a human, I should be able to lead you, okay? So I think in terms of leading leaders in this, it's education first, and also giving them some of these tools for what should a what takes you from a good one-on-one to a great one-on-one, kind of what you used
Yeah.
before, because you can do a one-on-one and you can have them be consistent and they're good. If you want to have a great one though, what does that look like when it comes to feedback that you're giving people? How can you give people really amazing feedback that's actionable, that's clear, that they feel like, now I feel like I can grow because I got this really great feedback from you? So I think having resources for leaders, having tools of stuff they can look to is helpful. And some of the conversation we had before, Christina, where it's you help leaders know where they're strong and what their opportunities are. That's another thing where it might be, you might be a leader that's really diplomatic and that's a strength, but perhaps there are times when your team's like, everything can't be consensus driven. We
Right.
need you to lead this a
Please make
little
a
bit,
decision.
right? Yeah. And then you might be a leader that's maybe really authoritarian. And so hey, you are a leader, but this is not, everything's not just my way or the highway. So I think that's also helpful for leaders to know where you're doing, know how you can leverage your strengths and what your opportunities are, and also giving leaders tools to develop and grow in that space.
Mhm. Absolutely. And you would know if you were being kind of too diplomatic, also if your team didn't tell you as well. So really fostering kind of that environment too. And I think especially as a leader, but we're always learning every day. So it's not like anybody is the perfect example too, but you can always kind of strengthen those skills in terms of leadership. You're a leader within the organization. I'm sure you manage and work with other kind of leaders too. How do you think about measuring the effectiveness of those who kind of shepherd teams?
Yeah. And I think in terms of measuring the effectiveness, there are things we've talked about, like surveys that help you see, and there are KPIs out there that help you see the effectiveness of a leader. For me, very broadly, I think as a leader, your role is to create the conditions for others to enact change. So when I'm looking at your leadership and your effectiveness as a leader, I'm looking at who you're leading, and more importantly, who they're leading as well. Because I think sometimes it gets stopped at that next level and stuff isn't coming down. And I think truly incredible leadership, again, going from good to great, is when those that you're leading, they're even able to kind of model that to those that they lead as well. That's where you're really, really enacting change in a meaningful way. So looking at how are you empowering leaders to be successful, what's the kind of environment you're creating, and how are you supporting others in driving performance and leading inclusively as well. That's what I'm looking at in terms of measuring a leader's effectiveness.
Yeah, I think your impact on others and really empowering folks across, the teams that you work on is important as well. So I think that's the only way to do it, and continue to learn and iterate, test new things, and always ask for that constructive, clear, like you mentioned, feedback. Uh, in terms of the many different projects you have going on a given day, what would you say right now is taking up the most brain space in your mind, or the next problem you're trying to solve?
Oh, easy. Burnout is a big one on my mind. I think
Burnout.
a current state, like we're doing a diagnostic to understand our current state. So that's a big thing on my mind. But burnout is big on my mind. And as I shared before, we're seeing this in our organization. We're seeing this in all the industries, and looking at how can we do this differently. I think something funky is happening with work that's been happening for a while, but it just proliferated in the pandemic. Been having a lot of conversation with my colleagues here and even people outside. There's something that's just broken when it comes to work, and that's what I think we're seeing with burnout. So that's big on my mind right now. We are launching an overcoming burnout initiative, really, again, to see how can we make sure people feel as resilient, as refreshed, re-energized as they could be. We're working with a leadership coach and burnout expert. In terms of this, we are working with our leaders to help them understand how they can create these environments, really supportive environments for others. We put together what we're calling a thriving toolbox, which includes initiatives like meeting reduction and testing out no meeting Fridays. It includes
Yes.
resources as well, like priority lists, how to have efficient and inclusive meetings. It also includes events, and we're just having a series of things that we're releasing to people. So that's what we're trying now. But to your point, Christina, we want to listen to people to say, how is this working? Is this what you all want? What will be most helpful for you? So we're having those kind of quarterly touch points with the leaders, with employees to say, how are we doing? What else is needed to make sure we're building these environments where people love working here?
Mhm. Absolutely. And it sounds like in terms of resources, time, programming, testing things out, there's a bunch of different kind of strategies that you're testing. It's not like a one and done, okay, we're taking care of burnout, we're taking care of people's mental health, recognizing everybody's kind of at a different point of their lives too.
Yep.
Something might work for someone else, that might not work for someone else. So I think there's a big conversation around personalization at scale and having these conversations. So I think that definitely makes sense. I definitely want to ask a question around, it's February 2022. How is IPG kind of honoring and celebrating Black History Month this year? Also recognizing that they shouldn't, be celebrating Black employees or be talking about this only, this month, but I definitely wanted to ask.
Yeah. Great question. So Acxiom and Kinesso and Matterkind, we have a series of events and conversations where we're having to build awareness and enhance, action from allies and others, and to also invest in our Black employees. We're also going to be sharing resources to help people invest in the community as well. So what can you do to make a lasting change when it comes to this? So I think that's the multi-pronged approach we're taking. And to your point, Christina, when we have our business resource groups, and we look at, that's the question we're asking about, how can we take this month where eyes are more attuned to the Black experience? How can we leverage this attention for something that is beyond this month, that is going to make it a change? So that investment in our employees, that investment in the community, how can we continue that conversation beyond this month?
I love it. Continuing the conversation, 365 days a year. I was talking to someone the other day and they said they kind of bake it into their product, their talent, just like everything. It's not just about the month. And I love it. It sounds like there's a similar thing happening at IPG as well. Kind of shifting from just your experience at IPG and the current kind of company, even with the best intentions, people kind of make mistakes when they are trying different things. And a lot of people are, I should say, some people are leaning more into diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is great. But what are some mistakes you're seeing organizations make in their kind of equity strategy? Of course, not naming names. You don't have to do that.
Yeah, and it's a theme I'm seeing where there's a lot of energy around the D and not as much energy around the E and the I. So lots of energy around representation. We need to amp, how we're bringing people with diverse backgrounds in. And I love that energy. But then I'm seeing that when it comes to having equitable processes, when it comes to what's this environment you're creating, is an inclusive environment,
Yeah.
sometimes there isn't as equal energy when it comes to that. So like, to me, it's like when I think about it, it's like you're throwing this party and you invite all these amazing people to the party, and they show up and your house is a mess, and they're kind of like, why did you invite me to this party if your house wasn't ready for me? You didn't have enough food for me. And I think that's a common mistake I'm seeing with organizations. And also, to your point, Christina, you said earlier, this is a journey. And sometimes it's just easier to focus on representation, right? That's just an easier thing. It seems more concrete and easy and measurable, and you can see the progress and you can do this. It's harder to focus on, like, equity requires you to look at all your processes, look at inequities, and usually change how you're doing some things in your processes. And the same with inclusion, right? That's a culture shift, and that takes time. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. So I see why I think sometimes equity and inclusion can feel more ambiguous to some companies. But in our company, we have focused on all of those, right? We want to make sure we have different perspectives represented in our organization. And also, we want to make sure that when we bring them into the environment, it's one where they enjoy. It's
Yes.
one where, when it comes to them thriving, they have those equitable opportunities to do that. So that's something I think there's an opportunity. I love that it seems like people are starting to understand this a little bit more, but it is a mistake I'm still seeing across the industry.
Absolutely. Definitely heard that people focus a lot on building out the candidate pipeline, which is great. And I'm also more junior level roles, which is great, but we also want representation in executive roles at boards, and also that retention. If you don't have enough food, if you don't have the resources for success, it's not going to be sustainable either. So put in the legwork now. I'm sure that you have many of these, but is there a recent, whether it's big or small, proudest moment doing this work?
Oh, it's my proudest moment, but I'm just proud of the people that put in this work.
Yeah.
So a key theme in what our approach to DEI is we want to embed it in everything that we do. So this includes our people internally, but it also includes how we do business. We want to embed DEI. So we're looking at, who do we do business with? And so there are all these incredible, really incredible business initiatives that we're doing in the DEI space, Christina. And I think my proudest moment was at the end of last year. We asked these leads to just share an update of how they were doing. And I think I just had this really kind of emotional moment where you saw the work that people are doing on top of their day jobs to really make a meaningful impact in this industry. There's some projects where people are looking at how can we mitigate bias in data? How can we mitigate bias in the audiences that we're creating? How can we, these same tools that we're providing to all these companies, how can we support the Black community with this? How can we give back in that meaningful way? The suppliers that we're using, how can we broaden that a little bit and our supplier inclusion program? So I think for me, that was probably my proudest moment and one of my greatest moments here, to see this really amazing work that we're doing in our company and what we're doing to kind of make an impact in this space.
Absolutely. Not only externally, which is important, but out in the community, out with folks who you're doing business with. I think that's also important to highlight too. It just manifests in a 360 way. Femi, is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to share with folks who are listening, or underscoring 1 to 2 key takeaways that we have discussed this afternoon?
I think it was a great conversation. I think if anything, I want to double click on listening. Listening is a superpower. If you listen to people, if you're listening and you're acting on what they tell you, that is instrumental to your success as an organization. It's also instrumental to your success as a human being. Are you listening to people around you and acting on what you hear? So if anything, I think just doubly clicking on that and making sure organizations are listening to their people and acting on the feedback they hear.
Absolutely. Listening is important as an individual and as an organization, as a leader, also in any kind of relationship in your life too. Femi, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
My pleasure. Thank you, Christina.
And as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in the employee feedback management as a requirement for the organization to succeed overall. Have a good rest of your afternoon, everyone.